there was campaign finance reform, a lot more disclosure and reporting because it was really weak prior to that point. Freedom of information, open meetings, all that sort of sunshine stuff was enacted, again, pretty much with bipartisan support. And by the way, under Bill Milliken, we would have every week in the governor's office a so-called quadrant meeting whereby the governor and the Republican leader of the House and Senate and the Democratic leader of the House and Senate would sit down every week and hash out the issues. Well, you know, that just doesn't occur anymore. It just doesn't occur.
I know. Whoever is in the majority seems to completely suppress the minority.
Absolutely.
And the governor himself or herself doesn't seem to put much emphasis on getting the minority in the room if the majority doesn't want them there.
Right.
So, and this is a bad thing, you think?
Well, I certainly think it is because yeah, we got a lot of good stuff done, you know, and it was because of those quadrant meetings. As minority leader, there were advantages in having the governor of your own party. I mean, I think in some respects it gave more gravitas, more weight to your position as minority leader. However, it had a downside. Now, I said I was elected unanimously both times as leader. That didn't mean that within the caucus there weren't those who didn't try to, you know, oppose, you know, a lot of what I did. And so the challenge for me was to bridge the gap between a somewhat conservative caucus and the very progressive Bill Milliken. So trying to bridge the gap, you know, didn't always make me super popular with the caucus, but it was an important thing and had to be done.
What do you remember of some of the other members, like, let's say, Bill Ryan, who succeeded Joe Kowalski as the Democratic leader? He was, I think, Roman Catholic. He was born and brought up in West Virginia. He was a union guy, very stubborn negotiator.
I always said that he was the American version of the European party, the Christian Socialists. He was very religious.
Yes, yeah.
But he's also sort of a socialist.
Yes, yeah. You're pretty far out there.
And you know, if you'd meet him, he is not the typical, you know, political leader. He was not a good-looking guy.
Very
he was not,
quiet,
very
self-effacing, modest.
Very self-effacing, very modest, but very good, highly respected, very, very, very able.
Right.
And so I always had a lot of respect for Bill Ryan.
What about Bobby Krim, who succeeded him?
Yeah, Bobby was certainly a very able person, you know, and
former school teacher.
Former school teacher who had been elected in the '64 Dem landslide and then defeated in the '66 Republican landslide.
Yes, exactly.
And then they carved a district for him in that
under Hatcher Kleiner.
Infamous '72 plan. So he had a district.
Right.
Came back and immediately became the Dem floor leader. So when I was Republican floor leader, he was my Dem counterpart.
Right.
And then 2 years later, when I became leader, he was you know, the Dem leader, as Speaker of the House.
As a Speaker of the House.
So we were in tandem in that respect.
There was somebody else who was elected while you were a member of the House in 1970 in your party, a guy named John Engler.
Yes.
And he was only like 21, 22 years old, and you served with him for 8 years, from 70 to 78. At which point you left. We'll get to that in a minute. And John Engler ran for the state senate in that year and won. But those 8 years. So what do you remember of John Engler then? Was there any inkling that John Engler would go on to become the governor of Michigan for 12 years and do what John Engler did?
I will say that to the great majority of us, the answer to that would be no. But then I'm going to redeem myself here in a minute.
Okay.
He very much got under the skin of the Democratic members of the House and the Democratic leadership. I mean, they really...
How could somebody who was a lowly little freshman grubworm in the minority bother the Democrats so much?
Well, he was very assiduous. I mean, he was very diligent. And he would offer amendments that were designed to drive them crazy, which it did. And so he did a lot of homework, offered a lot of amendments, made a lot of speeches that were maybe short speeches, but kind of caustic regarding the Democrats and their agenda. He was not a good speaker. He was one of his great weaknesses, and I will say that he and I had a very good relationship all the time he was in the House. And I will also then say, despite the fact that few would have guessed based on those early years, that in my opinion, when he was elected governor, he turned out to be a very good governor. I think one of our best, frankly.
And he actually hadn't gone to Cooley Law School at that point and become a lawyer. That maybe probably whetted his skills somewhat.
It could be.
And maybe gave him the final boost. So anyway, it comes to 1978. You've been in the House for 6 two-year terms, and several things were going on that year. Governor Milliken decided, I'm going to run again for a third full term. He had to pick a lieutenant governor. And I think your name was very much in evidence as a possibility. What happened in that year, and what did it do for your future in politics or outside of politics?
Yes, 1978 was kind of a watershed year for me. There's an old saying, either go up or go out. And I've often said that politics and political office is not like starting up a new store in town. If you want to start a new hardware store right across the street from another hardware store, you can do it. But in politics, there are certain slots: governor, lieutenant governor, U.S. Senate, Congress,
right?
And practicalities suggest that you can't always run for those positions. If those positions are held by members of your own party and they are well regarded, you're shut out, basically. In my own case, yes, I was very interested in achieving higher office. I was, very much interested in doing that. But what happened was that in the case of the governorship, Bill Milliken decided, although he debated right to the very end whether to do it or not, he decided to run for one more term as governor. And Bob Griffin, the incumbent U.S. Senator, first said he was not going to run for re-election, basically dropped out, but then had a change of mind, and so he was running for re-election. That shut that possibility off. Guy Vanderjack was our member of Congress, very popular at the time, very accomplished speaker, very well known nationally. He decided to run for re-election. And to sort of add icing to the cake, Bill Milliken, in an unprecedented move, when he announced his re-election on that very day, walked into the assembled press with his lieutenant governor choice on his arm. And it was Jim Brickley who had been his lieutenant governor in the first term.
Right.
Well, the net result of that was that anyone like me was, there's no opportunities.
You could have run for the state Senate. There was an open state Senate seat.
But at that point, after 12 years in the House of Representatives and being the leader, I didn't want to, run for the state Senate and maybe start. So that was out. However, ironically, Bill Milliken did subsequently in 78 ask me to be the Republican candidate for Attorney General to run against Frank Kelly. I turned that down.
Who would be your later partner, but we'll get to that in a few minutes.
In law, yes.
So in other words, you were certainly interested in and willing to consider office outside the legislature in 78. That didn't happen for all the reasons you've described, but you had decided, look, I've had enough of the legislature, whether it's the House or the Senate. I would just as soon move on.
Yeah, but Bill, let's talk about something else for a minute before we do that, and that is kind of how some things have changed on the legislative and state government scene since the time I was first elected. For example, the legislature itself underwent a great transformation beginning in really 1965, the first Democratic term.
Right.
Both the Democratic leadership and somewhat reluctantly, but still complicit, the Republican leadership decided we wanted to make the legislature a respected branch of government.
It was almost a national movement going on.
And there was a
at that
national
time.
movement to provide adequate staff to state legislatures.
Strengthen the legislative branch.
Strengthen the legislative branch. Give them adequate staff. Give them a decent salary. Give them all sorts of support that they would need to do a good job, and to make them full-time so that they could take care of their constituents in the constituents dealing with the bureaucracy.
Right.
And so we took great pride in being, here in Michigan, one of the first truly professional, full-time legislatures. And I always supported that, and I still do, to the point where I think that some efforts going on right now to roll that back are greatly misguided.